to More Than Some. My name is Kat Thomas, and we are still in our Down Under series where we are traveling through the great country of Australia. Yes, the land down under. And there's so many reasons why you should fall in love with this country as much as I do, as much as all of the people that have been on this series so far have. And if you haven't watched through the first 3 episodes, I encourage you to do so. Special shout out to Vanya Cullen, Jane Ferrari, and Tim Wildman. And this week we've got a very special and fabulously just amazing human, Mr. Mark Davidson, joining us in just a few moments. I'm not going to dive too far into it just yet because he works in a very unique, mysterious, mindful way of threes. So I'll just give you 3 little snippets about him. Not only is he the education director for Wines Australia Americas, he's a loving and doting father and husband, and he has his WSET diploma. We're going to find out a few more sets of threes when we jump into More Than Some Down Under series with Mark Davidson. I want to shout out to Summation Live and Core Body Mind for giving me a platform to share the love of Australia with you all. I'll see you in just a minute. So welcome everybody to More Than Some. In our series of Down Under, we finally made it to Mark Davidson. Woohoo! So Mark, welcome to the show. So happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to see you.
We'll see how this goes. But a quote that I read that I just loved, and especially in this time and sort of moments that we're in, you need to live it and feel it, not just read and write about it. And if there's anybody that I've met that's in the industry of education, you truly have shown this in every aspect that you go about it. And you do it with a smile, you do it with an open heart, and definitely with a lot of enthusiasm. So I thought that was pretty cool. And
that is a good quote. I like it.
Yeah, you did well. See, we're done with the interview.
Good.
And
well, nice chatting.
You mentioned that you take things in threes, or you think about things in threes. And when I was kind of plotting and planning around and trying to do some investigation work on you, I did notice that you talk about things in threes quite a bit. So we're talking about the mindfulness of threes, things that excite
cool.
Mark Davidson. And it is not something that I would only say because I've seen it written, so therefore it must be. You have been dubbed an Australian wine visionary. So
wow.
Yes.
Where that came from. Someone must have been drinking at the time.
That is from Mr. Dhillon of Bindi Wines.
Oh, wow. And then that, I will happily absorb that compliment from a man of his stature. Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. A lot of time for him.
Yes, and we're actually going to be talking with him after this series, so we'll send some regards. So today, and if you want to show everyone your shirt, woohoo! So we're going to be talking about Grenache and its presence in Australia and what it really feels and means to you, the reemergence of different varieties or their emergence thereof, and that fun little island within an island called Tasmania, because I definitely don't get to try enough things from there, and I don't think a lot of people really hear about it. They know about the Tasmanian devil, and that's about it. But real quick, I always like to give a little rundown of the big hits of the human that is here with me. And thank you again in advance. So Mark Davidson is the head of education and development for the Americas for Wine Australia. You've been doing that for 12 years now, right?
Yeah, it's actually been a role that's evolved a little bit over time. I actually was doing a global role for Wine Australia, so I was traveling around the world doing what I'm doing now. But that was when I was a period of time when I was single and shaking and moving. Now I'm not. I'm just shaking. I'm just not moving as much. So I've done all sorts of things. So I've been involved with the global team as well. So, but it's the same sort of discussion. It's just now mercifully sort of focused just on North America, which includes Canada.
Awesome, awesome. You have your WSET diploma, which is great.
Yep. Yeah, I've always been into wine study. I've also taught many programs because I had the APP for WSET in Vancouver. I had my own wine school in Vancouver for a long time. So yeah, love WSET.
Woohoo! You also are an International Sommelier Guild member and have your diploma there as well, right?
Yeah, that was more a function of when I got into being a sommelier or decided, like, this is my path. The court wasn't really available up in Canada in those days. This was in the 80s. And so this was a path I followed. Now, obviously, I would have done the court system and that path, but it wasn't really that available. So that was the path I took for those wine studies, and that was it.
So if it doesn't sound like Mark is from Canada, that's because he's not, but he spent a lot of time in Canada, and so much that he impressed upon enough people that he won in 2001 the Sommelier of the Year award in the Vancouver Wine Festival, International Wine Festival, and in 2014 a Spirited Industry Professional Award. So kudos on that.
Thank you.
You are a loving father and husband, right?
Yep.
So that's a big
hit.
I am.
That is a big hit.
Yes. And not a hit yet, but you're writing a book. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I am. I've been roped into doing the Wines of Australia through the Classic Wine Library, and that was initiated by my friend James Tidwell, who said, hey, I've put your name forward. And so next thing you know, I'm signed up to do it, which is, at once exciting, but also a bit daunting in the fact that I'm trying to get down to Australia to spend some of my time down there, not Wine Australia time, my time to get involved and see some places I haven't seen, spend time in places I do know well, doing the things I want to do, not just traveling around with groups and what have you. And I can't go because there's quarantines and double quarantines in Australia. You can fly into Sydney, and then if you fly to the South Australia, there's another 2 weeks of quarantine. So 2 weeks, it's like, wow. So I have to wait for that to sort itself out. And yeah, I'm hoping by the end of next year, the book will be up and running and published. But yeah, we shall see. Fingers crossed.
I'm excited for
I'm excited.
Yes. And you have taken a lot of people into Australia to actually figure out what the heck is going on there and why it's so special. I haven't had the fortune of being in Australia in that tour with you, but we crossed paths.
We did. That's where I first met you, I think. Yeah.
Yes, of course. I went up and I was like, oh, hey. Because you have that personality and you have that reputation behind you. And I just knew that I needed to kind of put my face in your way. And I'm glad that I did. So you're involved with that and you're just a badass human. So I think your passion and everything that I kind of am going to keep talking about that revolves around who you are, which of course is more than some. So you're more than just that one little wine nerdy person that we love. We're going to start with a few icebreakers that I didn't give you. So we'll see how these go over. Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
And I picked that. Really?
Which is interesting because my first job was at a pancake restaurant.
That's why I thought I threw.
But if I can have a good waffle and I have a waffle maker at home, I'm having waffles.
All right, now I know. Fishing or sunbathing?
Fishing.
Bed made or the bed left undone?
I am an expert at leaving the bed undone, but I do like the bed made, although it's usually not me that's making it.
An expert, I like that. This one is a little tricky, maybe not right now. Canada or the USA?
Oh man, that's a tough one right now. I live in the US and I came here willingly, and I can go on a long diatribe about. There's lots of things that I absolutely adore things about the US, and I spend a good portion of my, the last 20 years telling my stupid Australian friends and stupid Canadian friends who say stupid things, blanket statements about Americans, and I've been defending America for the last 15, 20 years. And come on, you've got to get down there. You look at, yes, you can see this on one hand, on the other hand, you've got all these wonderful things down here. Right now, It's an awkward time, but I love it here. I live here for a reason. It's not just because of my wife. I do love it down here. The opportunities here and the attitude and the great people I know down here. I love living down here.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. And that is very well versed. I like it. If you were a record album, what would you look like?
Oh, it would be one of the Led Zeppelin albums, probably Led Zeppelin 2.
Ooh, all
Yeah,
right.
mad Led Zeppelin fan. I will go to my grave. I saw Page Plant play after the fact, but to see them in their prime at somewhere like, I don't know, the Fillmore in the 60s, something like,
You
yeah,
might
I
not
will.
be here still.
I will be sad that that never happened. But oh yeah, mad Led Zeppelin fan. Although my music taste is extremely varied, but day in day out, there's always a Led Zeppelin track in there.
See, I learned something new. I'm excited. What is your favorite lettuce?
Butter lettuce.
Okay, good. If you were a color, how would others see you?
How would others see you? How would I would like others to see me? Not something monochromatic.
Okay.
I don't know if it's maybe blue, some sort of hue of blue that's a bit more sort of, enticing than just flat blue. But I don't know. Blue's probably it. Yeah.
How about sapphire?
Sapphire's nice.
Kind of exciting.
It's
All
got
right.
a bit of glimmer to it. Yeah, I like it. Cool. Sapphire. That's it. I'm going to be Sapphire from now on.
Well,
That'll
there's
be my
a
stage
job
name.
for you here in Las Vegas at a very prestigious place
Yeah.
down the street.
Yeah.
And you can
Sapphire
call
on the
yourself
main
Sapphire.
stage.
So the Japanese have a word, soon, that describes a daily habit or practice that helps you achieve some kind of contentment. We call it happiness in some realms of the planet. But what is something that you do, or if not, that you do daily to achieve happiness or contentment?
Good question. I probably need to be better at this. In fairness, I need to have a slightly better sort of routine at things, and I think it's a function of, number one, working in restaurants for years and traveling. It's hard to be into a normal rhythm, but one of the things we do, my wife and I do now, and in fact, it's in my wedding vows, is that if we're at home together, I make tea in the morning and we have tea in bed. It doesn't happen every day for a number of reasons. Not that I don't like to get up and just go. So if I've got to get up and go, I'm up a couple of hours early. I just like to have to gently ease my way into the day. And as much as I am a mad coffee drinker, I like the more calm, gentle approach of tea. So that's the thing. So that would be a consistent morning routine, which is like, I'll get up, I'll make tea, and we'll have tea in bed, and sort of discuss our day, or not, but tea in bed.
That's beautiful. It's a goal, right?
It's a goal, yeah. But I've been doing a good job at it. I have to admit, you've reminded me that I need to get on the program.
The Japanese did it. It's not me. I'm just, following suit. What are two of your favorite things about Australia?
The landscape, because I do think it's unique. There's a lot of unique things, but there's something about, and because I grew up there, I think a lot of camping and hiking, surfing and fishing and stuff. There's just a smell in Australia. It might be the eucalypt thing or something, but there's a smell and there's a look and feel of the landscape that I think is utterly unique, and I love that. The second thing, I do love the beaches, but that's just so simple and glib. I think the nature of Australians, and to be brutally honest, that's something I'm trying to capture in the book, because I think how Australians are and how we've been how Australia developed as a country, and the immigration and the sort of attitudes to settlement in Australia, I think has really made us who we are. And I think there's something very special in that, and I can't quite put my finger on it.
So who has been your biggest mentor or motivator in your professional career?
Motivator? Oh, I think, honestly, when I wasn't one of those kids that went through school and knew I'm going to be this. I had no clue. But I know that when I was involved in hospitality, I enjoyed it. And then I did a wine course, and that was it. And just that, to be honest, I think that thirst, for want of a better term, for just uncovering bits and pieces about wine, something I found really fascinating, and why this tasted that way. That's actually motivated me a lot. But there's probably two people in the industry that have shaped how I am and ended up professionally. One was a guy I worked for. I'd been in service for a while, and then I worked for a really amazing guy at a restaurant in Vancouver. His name was Erwin Doberly, old Swiss guy. And I learned more about proper service from this guy. We're not talking about fancy proper service, just spiritually and sort of ego-wise. I learned so much stuff about what service means. It's like, we're not in the education business, we're in the service business. When you change upstairs, leave your ego in the locker, because it's not about you, Mark Davidson, it's about, and it's like, oh, cool. There was a lot of things I learned there. Another gentleman from a wine perspective, his attitude towards wine, him and I are very similar, but I've just always taken inspiration from him, is a guy called Richard Harvey. He was on one of the Busby tours. I don't think he was on yours. He was on the year after. He has a wine store in Calgary, and this guy, I think I know a lot about wine. I feel like he's forgotten more than I know. He's so amazing and so humble. And yeah, and as a young, enthusiastic somm, I used to travel around with him at times. He'd be in some obscure appellation in France, which at that time was my specialty. And you'd be in, I don't know, we're in Béarn, the appellation of Béarn, small little appellation, and he'd tell you the top 5 producers. And I'm like, dude, just an amazing guy. So I think Richard Harvey and Erwin Doberly were real inspirations for me in the business.
Can you say that other gentleman's name again? It just sounds fun.
Erwin Doberly, a Swiss guy. He was a character, man.
What have been your biggest challenge, and then your best challenge in your professional career? Or it could be your personal.
Professional's probably a bit easier, because I think they're connected to one and the same. I think it's nice to get accolades and awards and this, that, and the other, and I've had a number of them, but that's fun. But I think I was in the Master of Wine program, and I passed the tasting first time I sat it, and to me that was an amazing sensation. It was like, wow, I knew I could. I didn't think I'd pass the first time. I was quite surprised I did, but I thought I can pass this exam. The challenge for me was writing academically about wine is a little bit more of a challenge for me. I'm a hospitality guy. I didn't do the university degrees. I went through hotel school. So I think the biggest challenge for me was getting over that line, and I didn't get over the line. So that was a bit of a challenge and perhaps a disappointment. But with a bit of time and space, I've also realized that things get in the way and other priorities come up in your life, and going back and redoing year to a point, it's like, okay, enough's enough, and I just want to move on and do other things. But so tied in one, I think I felt very strongly about that certification as being the pinnacle of what you can achieve, and at least I passed the tasting, even if I'd rather shove sharp objects up my fingernails than write essays. That's another one, right?
Well, now you're doing that with the book.
That's different. I don't have to write 1 hour essays. I could just take my time and sort of exercise a few demons that way.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about a few demons in just a moment for some, because we're going to talk about the evolution and revolution of wines in Australia.
Yep.
And let's start with the demon number 1. What is your take on that? I think I have a great quote here. It just makes me giggle even before I say it. I will not tolerate the bullshit excuses for plain old shitty wine. It's almost like a Dr. Seuss is starting to write this. And I think that ties into kind of some of the things that we can talk about with the evolution and revolution of wine in Australia.
Sure. I was lucky. I grew up in an era where we were inundated with classics in the trade. You were inundated. You went to Grand Cru Burgundy tastings. Now, I know that exists in some parts of the US, like in New York, another in Vegas probably. But for the most part, young somms nowadays don't get to see that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that is the pinnacle of everything, but in those days, it set standards for us. First growth Bordeaux. I mean, Mondavi used to do tastings where he compared his wines to the first growths. And you went to these tastings and you're like, wow, that's kind of cool. So I grew up on a steady diet of classics. Then I ended up working at a bistro in Toronto, where I got to work with all these funky, small production, small little wines in from obscure appellations. I was pouring Côte de Frontenac by the glass back in the 80s and stuff. So we were working with some cool stuff. Then the natural wine movement came along, and I balked initially, coming from a classics background. But then I'm also constantly mindful of the fact that, hey, I don't want to be that grumpy old wine guy, because things change, things evolve, and let's look into it. And it was actually an Australian natural wine that shifted my perceptions, and I forced myself to think differently, and really started to enjoy and really appreciate what's going on with the natural wine movement. And I don't like the term, but that's another story. That's for another debate. But what I appreciate about it, and I'll get into what I think's bullshit, because I think there is some. I think what's great about it in the big picture is making small and large wineries alike go, okay, what are we doing with our practices here? And we've been really adamant from, food, be it, Whole Foods and whole emergence of like what's in our food. And we've never had to divulge that with wine. And I think it's really important that people know that it's not just grapes, gently crushed by feet somewhere and that's it. It makes itself in the corner. There's some additives that are probably not necessary and probably not very good for wine. But so I think that's been a really nice movement, but it's like anything. You have to have something way over here on the extreme to draw attention to a subject, and then that brings people over. I just struggle with the extreme, and I view that really extreme as, there's a pretense and a snobbery at that end of the spectrum, which I don't like. Within that, I think things evolve, things change. I think we're all even major proponents of like, hey, this natural wine movement's great, are getting tired of the faults and flaws and problems that exist within some natural wines. So the next evolution, which I think is awesome, because you're seeing this in clear view in Australia, and especially in the basket range, the great producers there, it's low intervention. It's just, it's as natural as you can get anywhere, but it's with thought, and it's not this idea that, I just pick it and it creates and makes itself in the corner here. Wine doesn't make itself in the corner. It requires a little management. Grapevines don't grow the way we are asking them to grow. They are woodland climbers. They would go straight up a tree. We are forcing them to grow in a way that they are. So there's intervention, and I have no issue with that. I think the bullshit excuses that with that quote comes from is absolutely true. I think there's no excuse for it, because to my mind, great wine and interesting wine does speak of the variety, more varieties involved, and there's that somewhereness. And when that somewhereness is overridden by issues like, you could have people argue about Brett, they talk about this mousiness and all things. Like, I'm sorry, that stuff tastes like that in every wine from any corner of the globe, and I think that's where the crap lies, and that's not cool. So that being said, I think I had, it was actually one of Anton von Klopper's wines that turned me onto it. I was in Asia when I was doing the global job, and I tried his Wild Man Blanc, which is his, fermented in the ether, like the outside in the cosmos. And it was Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc. And I just thought, okay, forget what I know about Sauvignon Blanc, forget what I know about Adelaide Hills and Sauvignon Blanc, just work on the deliciousness factor, which I think we all should do with pretty much every wine. Is this delicious first and foremost? That's wine's primary job. It needs to be delicious. And I tasted it and I thought, man, this is really cool. And it was savory and it was full of umami. And I knew the next day we were flying to Japan. The guy that was working with us was from Tokyo. And he was taking me to his local place that he grew up with. In the suburbs of Tokyo, it was a sushi place, and we were having dinner with a journalist. I said, that's what we're taking. We're taking a bottle of that. He said, why? I said, because we're not drinking sake, because this has more umami than sake. Well, maybe not, but so we did that, and it was one of those turning points for me. I thought that was great. And subsequently, I love Anton. I love some of his wines. I've also had some absolutely dreadful bottles, to be brutally honest, and it's just the way it goes. And I think that I love it. I think it's a really cool movement. I don't prescribe to the pretense and the snobbery that involves with it in the same way I don't to the other end of the snobbery scale. I just think it's that's rubbish, but a cool thing to have as part of the spectrum. And think about how you were taught the same way. Color, clarity, blah blah blah. All that's out the window. Because you would ignore most natural wines and pet nats by color alone if you were to go by the standards we were taught. So I love that that's being challenged. I think that's cool.
Yes, and it should be that it's based on how delicious it is.
In the end,
it's food for thought. It's literally going in as kind of still a food for your gut. So
yeah, and sometimes, this whole idea, oh, what's this made from? Who cares? It's literally a dog's breakfast of different varieties, but in the end, it tastes great. And, my favorite producers up in the Adelaide Hills, Taras, we'll talk about Taras because it is Grenache, and that dude, he's just got it figured. He says, don't call me a natural wine producer. I hate that. I said, oh, okay, why? He said, because nothing I'm doing is unnatural. He says, but I love sulfur, and I've made a mistake in one vintage more recently where I just had a little too less. He uses very little sulfur. I had a little too, and I just didn't like the unevenness in my wines. I said, sulfur for me, with the right amounts, just small amounts, gives my wines, it's like they keep them in place. And I'm like, okay, cool, love it. And I've got some brilliant quotes from him. Like someone just
he's
completely,
like the most natural looking dude that you're gonna find, or family that you're gonna find.
It's totally, and his wines are just, I think he's made people brave about Grenache, and we'll get to that later because I think he's great. And then there's Gareth Belton, and there's other people up there, gentlefolk, rainbow juice from gentlefolk. Hello, sign me up and gargle that stuff down till I'm blue in the face. It's so
and
good.
It travels well. That's where,
line.
It kind of gets tricky, but I think you'd mentioned you didn't like the phrase natural wine, and I prefer to not have to use any of these, and I just wrote a few. It's like we've got clean, there's raw, there's blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just that actually makes it so unnatural to me because we're trying to put it in a defined category. But thank you for going into depth.
Sorry, that was a rant, but there you go.
Hey, we love rants. So let's talk then about the variety Grenache. I want to give Grenache its due time and presence because it's one of those really fiercely fabulous grapes that I think has been put on the back burner for a lot of years by people, no matter where it comes from. And I know you and I've at least rambled to you that I just fell in love with Grenache when I was in Australia, and I'll kind of let you take it away why that might have happened for me.
I think it's one of those varieties. It's a very historic variety. It's widely planted. It loves warmth, and it loves to be out in the sunshine. Yet, for some weird reason, it's been sitting in the shade. In terms of our own perception of it, it's like the blue collar worker. It's like, oh, and it's true of in some ways. Of course, there's some exceptions in France. You can have the exceptions and historic like Rayas and Chardonnay, but in the end, it's been this, oh, cool, this is an excellent blending variety, or it's really cool for producing sugars, therefore it will be wonderful for fortification, which is kind of the history of it in Australia, yet it's thrived in Australia. Unfortunately, a lot of old vine Grenache did get pulled out in the 80s in Barossa and McLaren Vale, but there's still some that exist. But I think being able to look at single varietal Grenache and say, okay, well, what have we got here? And I see strange parallels in other parts of the world where people start to look at some of those varieties that have been there for a while. I mean, I think of Nerello Mascalese in Sicily. You think of, Nera d'Avola and all those things. Where it's like, actually, if we start paying attention to this, do better things in the vineyard with it, we can actually shape something of character and interest. And I think what has happened with Grenache is that it's sat into this box over here. You use it for blending. It ripens really easily. But if you manage that ripeness, pick it a little early, do some good things in the vineyard, pick it with some precision and some tannin and some acidity, because that's stuff that can disappear quickly in Grenache. And then treat it sort of, you look at the practices now, there's a bit of Pinot stuff going on with it, right? Whole cluster. The only thing I'd say, that people are, cold soaks, whole cluster, and a few, whole cluster or whole bunch, stems being added back in afterwards for a bit more sort of grip and structure. And I think that what's being captured now is a much broader spectrum of what Grenache is capable of, from sort of perfumed and ethereal on this side. I mean, really, really light Grenache is probably not that easy to achieve, but light to medium bodied and perfumed through to full bodied and tannic and quite structured is feasible. But in the same way that I see Pinot that's deep, dark and concentrated and dark looking, I feel suspicious, and I feel that way about Grenache when I see really dark, really concentrated Grenache. I go, okay, something's not quite right here, because it's a thin-skinned variety. And you see this lovely spectrum with Grenache, and I'm super excited about it. I remember legit, it was Taras at Ochota Barrels. I didn't know anything about him. I was in Sydney. A friend of mine said he worked for Wine Australia. So you got to try this. It's like 10 years ago, probably. Tried this. I said, what the hell is this? And who is this? And I need more of this. And because it was so beautiful. And then you meet him and you not man, woman, or animal, you fall in love with him because he's just this amazing guy. And he's philosophically spot on. I don't always like every wine he makes, but the Fugazi Grenache is an absolute mind bender. And I think that was a starting point for me. And I know there's a lot of other people that were playing around with it, but McLaren Vale seemed to be a hotbed of it. And even talking to Pete Fraser at Yangara, he said, yeah, I've started to play around with some egg fermentations, picking earlier and looking at that freshness idea. And it was Taras. Taras made me brave. And I like that. There's someone that's got to step forward and go, you don't have to be 14.5%, 15%. You can pick it at 13. It could be around 13, 13.5, and you've got a different expression. And all expressions are great, but how nice to have this, and I'm sure you felt the same thing. And I know so many people that, aside from me indoctrinating them, they've gone down to Australia and gone, oh man, this Grenache, you keep banging on about the Grenache, but yeah, you know what? I get it. And It's cool. I like it because it's a variety. I think that, it's not native, obviously nothing's native to Australia, but it's so suited. It's so suited to many of the climates in the warmer regions in Australia. And I think that's what's so cool about it. Oak's the interesting thing for me though. I like the Pinot comparisons because I think there are. Pinot works with oak. Mm-hmm. Grenache, to my mind, doesn't. Old oak, for sure. New oak and Grenache, it's something that just sits on top and sticks out. So I don't know. I've never quite understood why that works. Why it doesn't work with Grenache.
Would you say that the McLaren Vale's identity then should be linked to Grenache?
Oh, I don't know. I think that's a tough one. I'm not sure. I think we like to simplify because it's like, okay, hey, the best thing that's happening in McLaren Vale is this. Whereas I would argue that, media doesn't like this because it's confusing. But the reality is, I think the diversity and the excitement that exists with other varieties down there is what makes McLaren Vale so exciting to be in. I mean, the most planted variety, period, is Shiraz. So that's the benchmark variety so far. I just think that I'd like to see, I think they know it too. Like the McLaren Vale producers know that Grenache is a calling card, and people like to pay attention to what's going on there. But I would argue there's a lot of things down there. So hanging your hat on this one variety, not so much. That people are starting to know McLaren Vale for what's going on with Grenache there, I think super exciting. But yeah, I'm not a proponent of what's your unique selling proposition. I'm just not like that. I like diversity.
I think that's a good way to segue into a second of your threes, is the emergence or reemergence of varieties and what that is doing to the Australian wine sector. And what are those varieties? What's coming out of the cocoon and what needs to go maybe back in the cave?
Yeah, I'm going to be careful about what needs to go away. I'm not going to address that one. But I think coming out into the sunshine is Grenache, no question. That's a variety that we've got. Not only do we have some of the oldest Grenache, have the oldest Grenache vineyards on the planet, ungrafted, unrooted, ungrafted vineyards. That coming to like as a single varietal wine and not being this blue collar worker in the background has been, I think, super exciting. I think in many parts of Australia, but let's just look at McLaren Vale because I think it's a perfect little lens through which to view these changes because they've been very progressive. There's been plantings, and for many years, actually, longer than people think, playing around with the other southern Mediterranean varieties, which, looking at climate change, it's real. Don't believe some of the things you read.
What? No.
Yeah, it's another subject. Oh, we just get so political if we're not careful. But if you look at the what's happening, many producers in Australia have gone, okay, what can we do with a changing climate? What are the best things we can do? Viticulturally, we can make adjustments in the vineyard with training and trellising, this, that, and the other. And we can plant varieties that do better in warmer climates, that hold their acidity and freshness. And that's what you're seeing in spades. It's not because you want to plant and say, oh, this would be trendy, let's try and sell it. No. Fiano from Australia is probably not easy to sell. It's not about that. It's about this is suited. And Fiano, for whites right now, I think the most exciting stuff in, say, McLaren Vale and Riverland and other places, I would say Fiano and Vermentino, and they look good. They have the character that you want from both of those varieties, and then they have their McLaren Vale-ishness in there at the same time. And I think, what more, sitting there, you've been to Star of Greece or one of the restaurants there where you're eating fresh caught squid. I mean, what do you want to eat? What do you want to drink? Oh, I don't know. Let's have a Chardonnay. No, how about have a glass of Fiano from the vineyard across the street kind of thing? And that I think is unbelievably exciting. Red varieties, there's been a bit of a shotgun approach there. A lot of things have been planted. Coriol's been doing a good job. They've had Sangiovese in the ground since the 80s. That's doing well. There's quite a lot of Tempranillo. Hard to see straight Tempranillos in Australia, which I think is interesting. But I think the one that's emerging out of, Sagrantino, this, that, and the other, the one that's emerging right now would have to be Nera d'Avola. That's the variety that seems to be shining. Yet in quarantine, about to be released soon, are some Greek varieties, which I think is exciting too. Be cool to see what happens with that. And there's some Portuguese varieties being played around with, also available here up through Ricatera Wines, the gentleman up in Ashley Radcliffe up in Riverland. He's made an Arinto. He's got Tarragonache. He's got all sorts of the great Portuguese varieties too. So I like that in that it's not done. I mean, there's commercial, simple, cheap and cheerful wines that are commercially planted and replanted and bench graft and changed for fad and fashion. That's not what this is about. This is about the future. This is about, what's going to be suited here. And if you think about it, if we were settled by Italians or Greeks, they would have, or if Italy and Greece were the famous wine-producing countries in the day when Busby was, traveling around. He went to France because France was famous. But frankly, a lot of those southern Mediterranean varieties are probably better suited to many parts of Australia. Not all parts, but many of the warmer zones. And that's what you're seeing in McLaren. And I just love it. I think it's super exciting.
And it's nice because the community of winemakers really embrace change a lot easier, it seems, than some other regions. I mean, I know Bordeaux just started planting some Portuguese grapes, which is mind-boggling and shocking that it happened. And not because the ground or the climate doesn't want that, it's the people. I was surprised that they even allowed it.
Well, I think there's also the appellation laws, which I loved learning about. We all love learning about the appellation laws, what you are and aren't allowed to plant. But that is going to be a thorn in the side long term, because I think what's going to have to happen, and the appellation laws are already changing, they're going to have to. I mean, I'm in the business because of Burgundy, tasting red Burgundy back when I was a young wine professional, not even wine professional, just a dork, blew my mind. And I thought, and it makes me sad to even contemplate, but in 100 years, is Pinot, the heart of, Pinot country in Burgundy, is that going to be suited to Pinot? I hope the answer is yes, but we really don't know. I mean, I don't know, Domaine de la Romani Conti made with Grenache, who knows? It's nice to be in a position in a country like Australia and frankly, California, wherever, where it's like we're responding now. We're not waiting. It's like, it's already happening and these varieties have been in the ground. Vermentino's been in McLaren for 15 years now, and it's now sort of hitting its stride. So I think that's a cool thing, and I'm super excited about it, because who says we've always got to grow the same things in the same place? Everything's changing.
Good. Can you just point out what McLaren Vale-ness is?
No.
That I've never
no, I can. I think the cool thing about McLaren Vale is that it's a Mediterranean climate, not because it sits on the Mediterranean, but man, does it feel like it when you go there. I mean, you've driven down there, and there's olive groves. There's everywhere you are, you can see, feel, or smell the ocean, and it's a warm sort of sense. And if you've been to Greece or southern Italy, I was there. The last trip I was down there was with Madeleine Triffon, who's just one of the great. If you want to model yourself on a wine professional, take Madeleine Triffon as the model. She's amazing. She's from Greek background. She's grown up in the US, but she spent time in Greece, and she was never been before. And she says, she grabbed my shoulder as we're on the bus. She says, I feel like I'm driving into somewhere in Greece. I'm so excited right now. And I love that, because I do think there is that sensibility about it. So I think Southern Mediterranean for people that know that would be how to get a sort of sense of it. But then when you meet the people, you're clearly not in Greece or Italy. You're in Australia with some really cool stuff happening, unbelievable food, exciting conversation. It's fun talking to wine professionals in Australia, winemakers, because They've drunk everything from everywhere. You can have the most detailed conversation about Burgundy with a Grenache producer or a Shiraz producer because they've all drunk it. They're all up to date. So I feel like there's a modernness. And I think you touched on something I think about Australians, which I love, is there's an absolutely healthy respect for tradition in Australia, but we're not handcuffed by that. It's respect about, okay, this is how things were done or might be done somewhere else. But right now, this is what I'm going to do, understanding that exists and how can I best express what's happening in my side or my place or my region with that in the background, not in the foreground, which I like. I think it's kind of cool. Maybe that's the nature I've been trying to encapsulate. I should write that down.
It'll be here.
Down that.
So now for our third, one of your other mindful threes, let's talk about Tasmania, the Tassie love. There's a lot going on with Tasmania that a lot of people probably don't know, so I'm just going to ramble through very quickly. It's the most southerly state of Australia. It's about, 150 miles off the eastern coast, so off of Victoria. So it's an island within the island, basically. It's got more similarities to the New Zealand climate in the wine regions. I know.
What's that called? I don't know that place.
I know.
What's it called?
I said it. It's NZ. We'll just leave it. But actually, it's got more in common with the climate of Champagne.
There you go. Sort of, yes. There are some warm patches. I mean, it's an interesting island in the fact you're absolutely right. It's right off the southern coast of Australia, like next stop Antarctica. And the prevailing environment is Southern Ocean. It's called the Southern Ocean. It's like, hey, next stop Penguin City, you know? So it's cold. There's a lot of the West Coast is wet and harsh, but there's not a lot of vine growing there. But there is a sort of a rain shadow effect from the range of mountains on the West Coast. And so there's some pockets that I wouldn't call them tropical, but they are drier than you might imagine, and not super hot, but certainly dry in that sort of in the way that Alsace kind of works with that rain shadow. So you're in the northern sort of hemisphere talking about Alsace, so it's warmer than you might imagine for that latitude. Well, some parts of Tasmania are warmer than you might imagine for the latitude because of this rain shadow effect that's afforded some of the spots. So I think it's a super exciting place because it's had viticulture dates back to the 1800s there, but it's like anything, it wasn't really that well populated. Cool climate viticulture is hard work. It's much harder than some of the other colonies that we're developing. So it takes time to sort of manage and decide what does well there. And I think the cool thing about, no pun intended, the cool thing about Tasmania is that everyone's excited about what's possible there because there are areas that Mac Forbes just bought a vineyard site and he's starting to plant. He's bought a place in Tasmania in areas where even producers now say, what's he doing out there? It's too cold there. Well, they said that about all sorts of other parts of Australia, and guess where everyone is? They're all moving into these areas that frankly in time, he said, I'll either be a visionary or an idiot, but one of the two. So I like that though, because there's so much sense of excitement and it is pristine. It's like the west coast of Australia, or I'm trying to think of New Zealand. Okay, I've said it. I said the word New Zealand. But all the rain systems are coming from the west, the purest water and breezes and air. There's no land masses that it's coming across. It's just pure ocean. So there's a freshness and vibrancy and clarity to I feel like to the air there, which I believe. I mean, you can't directly translate that to the wines, but I feel like that exists. There's a purity and clarity that I think is magic from Tasmania. And it's not just, there's so many cool things happening there. I remember one of the first trips, one of the guys said, well, we're going to take your guys to a distillery. There's a whiskey distillery. And I thought, oh, really? So it's going to be really shitty. And it's some of the best whiskey I've had. And all the guys were like clamoring because then I knew nothing about it. It goes to show. But there's peat bogs, natural peat bogs in Tasmania, akin to what goes on in different kind of character and flavor, but there's real peat bogs and unbelievably pristine spring-fed water that people use. And the Lark's Distillery in the center of Hobart, magic, spot on, as good a whiskey as you'll get. It's like world-class stuff. So there's that element, and there's the beauty, the weird Tasmanian devils, and, sparkling wine. What else do you want?
So, I kept you for quite a bit of time here, and I wish I could keep you for many, many more hours because you're always there with a good story and your knowledge is tip top. So I'm always learning something while having fun. Is there anything else that you find passion in that you'd want to share with us about Australia?
Oh, there's so much stuff. I think probably the exciting thing, and this is, I mean, I took this job. I was working with wines from around the world as a sommelier in my wine school, and frankly, I spent more of my, I knew more about Italy and France for the previous sort of 10 to 15 years than I did about Australia. But I was always, keeping on top of what was happening in Australia, and to come back and work exclusively with Australia. Number one, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think there was a cool thing to see and talk about. But I've seen a change in 12 years, and that sounds ridiculous because that's a microsecond of a time in the wine business. But yeah, I think there's just a freshness thing going on in Australia, and that sounds sort of like a simplistic way to look at it. But I feel like there's just probably, I think it's reflected in the wine as freshness. But I think what's really happening is that we probably went through a period in Australia of trying to figure ourselves out in the beginning. Then we went through a period of some high quality wines being produced, and we were trying to, you see, my wines are more Rhone-like, or my wines are more Burgundian or Bordeaux-like. I don't think we need to be number one using those comparisons anymore, and I'm seeing a lot more of understanding this sort of inspiration rather than emulation. And I'm stealing that from Michael Hill Smith because I thought that was absolutely magic. I told him I'd give him credit maybe, but because I think it's so true. It's like we know what's going on over here. We know what's happening with their practices. They may not be applicable here, but I want to know how I can, with these things in mind, all this stuff in mind about the great wines of the world that may or may not be made from the varieties we're working with, what's the best I can do with my Pinot being grown in this site in the Yarra Valley? What's the best expression? Not I'm making a Burgundian or I'm making a Rhone like Shiraz or Syrah or Grenache. And I think that confidence and that evolution is leading to more fresh and vibrant and sort of authentic wines. So that I think is exciting. And so it's not really one thing. It's just, I think it's an exciting time to look at Australia. And we have never been in a luckier place generally. Think about wines we can drink now. We are lucky consumers. Mm-hmm. There are regions that were irrelevant when I got into the wine business that are not irrelevant. Greece wasn't even talked about. It was shitty Retsina and nothing else. That was it. And that's not that long ago. Sicily was Corvo Bianco, Corvo Rosso, and crappy Marsala. I'm over exaggerating. Now all of a sudden, southern Italy, I mean, there's so much good wine from every corner of the globe that we cannot. I mean, we're spoilt for choice, and with that in mind, Australia has its place in there, and I think it's as one of the countries, to my mind, that where excitement exists. I reckon Australia's top of the heap because there's just so much change and so much really exciting stuff. And I mean, you can apply that to a lot of countries right now, but I reckon Australia's one of the exciting places to look at right now. So.
Well, I'm excited, and I would hope that everybody out there can feel that passion and excitement through the screen because it's evident and it's appreciated. You had a very meaningful visit to Bindi and with Michael Dhillon, and since we're going to be speaking with him next, why was that so meaningful for you?
I think I think we all get like wine is this like it's all this. It doesn't fit into one box. There's commercial wines that are for everyday drinking. There's this and there, but then when you want to stop and think about the things that mean something to you, whether it whatever that might be, the fact that it was a Pinot Noir that stopped me in a tracks. It was a 1971 Chambord-Musigny village wine that I just looked at and pointed at it and swore at it because it was like, what the fuck? This is unbelievable. I've never had a wine that made me feel something. I've had wines that tasted good, and I've been fascinated with Pinot, and I met Michael. I tasted his wines and was blown away. And then you spend some time with him, and you go. And I've been on many visits, but I've also happened to spend some time when it was just for a day or so, just him and I, and actually it was James Tidwell. Just like, oh man, like everything that I love and appreciate about people that are that focused and that dedicated and that articulate and thoughtful in what they do to try and make things better every year. And you listen to him speak, and then you taste that in his wines. That to me is where the magic lies, and the fact that it's associated with Pinot, I think, is awesome. And he's one of the most articulate and thoughtful people we have in the wine business, period. And I'm not talking about Australia. I think he's just what he's trying to craft there which is, have you been to Bindi? It's in the middle of nowhere.
I was there for my birthday dinner, which was, I'm crying thinking about it, because you're spot on, and he definitely has that presence about him. And
then his wife is amazing too, and his kids are right. It's like, why are you so goddamn perfect? But his wines, I love talking to him about wines and what he's doing and everything he talks about and what he's trying to do in the vineyard and his close planting. It's like, yeah, dude, you are the epitome of I think the reasons why I got into wine in the first place, and love the professionals that do it for the right reasons. He's doing it for the right reason.
And finally, you have one glass of wine. You have 10 minutes, and you can choose one person to drink it with.
Oh, 10 minutes with that person? Or 10 minutes to decide?
And you can or cannot share the wine with them. It's up to you.
Oh, yeah. My wife would be number one, but you're talking about someone famous?
No, gosh, no. And she's famous in your world, so.
But no, it would be my wife. And I think that's the nice thing about the quarantine is we travel both, but she's in the wine business too, and we travel a lot. The nice thing about quarantine is we still like each other, which is awesome. Because I know that's been some challenges for some people. It's like we day in, day out, there's no one I'd rather spend more time with than my wife. So I'm happy to share bottles of wine with her. There's lots of people. But that being said, I think that's the answer. That's not even a political answer. Someone else said something to me recently. I love my husband, but I just want to drink wine with someone else for a change. I think because we're all in quarantine, that's the only person I'm drinking wine with. So I appreciate that sentiment at the same time. But when push comes to shove, I'm happy to drink wine with her anytime.
And what would the wine be?
Oh, well, I think the variety that the variety of Grenache might be in there, but having tasted some beautiful examples from Australia and knowing what I know about Piedmont, I think when push comes to shove, it's probably going to be Nebbiolo for me. Even though Pinot's been my thing, I think right now, day in, day out, you can drink regular Langhe Nebbiolo, you can drink Top Barolo, Barbaresco, and you can drink Luke Lambert or some of the Steve Panel's Nebbiolo from Australia. I'm like, I never seem to get sick of Nebbiolo. That's weird, isn't it?
Well, Mark, I am so very happy that we had this time together. And
awesome.
Thank you for sharing your energy, your passion, your mindfulness of threes. That is a good way to kind of fulfill the circle of things, of thought. And I know that everybody else out there is going to appreciate what you shared as well. So,
well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Enjoy your day.
Absolute pleasure. See you soon.
Bye. Thank you all so much for joining us in this series episode of More Than Some Down Under with Mark Davidson. I'm glowing and happy and elevated in my mood. That's what Mark Davidson is all about. And I'm glad that you were able to share in the experience with us. Please, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions. I'm going to be posting Mark's social media handles if you want to go bug him about a few things. Also, the Wine Australia website, and there's a free educational course website that I'll be posting on Wines Australia as well. A special shout out to Salmation Live and Core Body Mind for the platform to share and experience all this with you. I'll see you next week on More Than Some Down Under.